is in place and set up. So we can get down to work. Just a few windows there. Wait for me to confirm that YouTube has indeed begun streaming. And I think we're okay. All right, so it's still 11:59 on my clock. So say good morning for those of you that are here early. But we'll wait just a minute until we hit our 12 o'clock official start time because, well, that's the official start time. And I don't want people to feel bad coming in late when they're actually on time. I have no problem making people feel bad for coming in late when it's not. Nah, it's just kidding. It's always good to come for whatever we can. I know that our lives and situations are so complicated. It's a little tricky sometimes, but now it has officially hit 12 and looks like people are logging in through Zoom and YouTube. And I'll just do a quick little bit of housekeeping. So next week and the following week are, of course, the festival of Pesach. And that means that we'll be having services, and that means we'll not be doing the class during this lunchtime slot. So for the next couple of weeks, please enjoy your Passover celebrations together with your communities and family, wherever you happen to be. If you're in our neck of the woods, then please feel free to stop by Temple Israel. And I hope that you have a wonderful and joyous Seder with your family and communities wherever you are as well. And that, of course, is the point of these few classes that we've done as part of our lead up to the holiday of Pesach, which is to go over the Seder and try to uncover much of the original intent and structure in order that we can better appreciate what is being taught by the Seder itself, to better experience what is being given to us through the Seder, and to also understand the things that we have added to the Seder and find meaning and experiences through them as well. As we talked about at some length last time, simply reciting the Haggadah is not truly fulfilling the duty. And I'm sorry, someone has decided to start texting me extensively right at the moment of the class. And oh yes, it was a question about, are we having a class? So I'm going to once again put myself on Do Not Disturb. Thought that was already done, but apparently not. I'm sorry for that interruption, but trying to help people get to the class is always good. All right, so as I said, we are going to continue our discussion that we began last week, going through chapter 10 of Mishnah Pesachim. This is the Mishnah section that deals with the Seder, although as we saw in the first 4 paragraphs, Mishnayot of this chapter, it's not exactly the Seder as we know it. Definitely there are certain things that overlap, but there are also certain structures that we do not engage in. And that's okay. The Seder is meant to be a living experience. It's not meant to be a fossilized document. So let's go ahead and continue, and we'll pick up here in Mishnah 5 and notice some of the things that we continue to do and continue to connect to, and perhaps maybe don't understand the reasons or underlying impact of them, and maybe can enrich our own experiences as well. So, Mishnah 5. Rabban Gamliel used to say, whoever does not make mention of these 3 things on Pesach does not fulfill his duty. And these are they: the Pesach, the matzah, and bitter herbs. The Pesach, because the omnipresent passed over the house of our fathers in Egypt. The matzah, because our fathers were redeemed from Egypt. The bitter herb, because the Egyptians bittered the lives of our fathers in Egypt. All right. Now, this passage of Rabban Gamliel is found in our modern Haggadah, and indeed is probably very familiar to many people, although you're probably used to an extended version. Here, he mentions the 3 things and then gives a 1-sentence explanation for each one, whereas in most modern Haggadot, there is a lengthier paragraph describing each of them. As I talked about in previous sessions, the original Seder was a skeleton structure, and Rabban Gamliel is certainly not saying that you should only say these 3 sentences. Instead, what he is saying is that you should expound upon each of these, hitting upon the themes that he has mentioned in this outline. These are the bullet points on the PowerPoint that are meant to be expanded upon by the presenter, or in the Seder case, meant to be expanded upon by those who are attending. Remember, the Seder is never meant to be a lecture from one person at the end of the table. It is always meant to be an ongoing conversation and discussion. So what are these three things? Well, the Pesach may sound a little strange in that format of a word. We often use the word Pesach to refer to the holiday as a whole, but the Pesach is a technical term referring to the sacrifice itself. Now, when he says then that we're mentioning the Pesach, he is not saying we should mention that we used to have a sacrifice. We are instead mentioning that first Pesach offering, the first sacrifice that was done in the land of Egypt, was there as part of the passing over of the angel of death during the plague that killed the firstborn. And so this is meant to remind us of that final plague. It is meant to remind us of God's protection during that final plague. It is meant to remind us of the fear that we felt and the feeling of liberation that came once this plague was concluded and we were sent out of Egypt. There are so many things that we can connect to when we focus on that first moment of the Pesach, of that first offering. Likewise, the matzah is reminded because that is how we were redeemed from Egypt. Now, again, he doesn't go into great detail, and most of us are likely to want to expand upon this. People will often recount how we had matzah because we didn't have time to wait for the bread to rise. Very important to remember that meant that you would mix the water and flour and then cook it fast, rather than mix the water and flour and wait for it to rise before cooking it. So it wasn't that we carried out dough and then cooked it later, as I unfortunately heard some people say, with the dough upon their back kind of idea. It was instead that we would slap it together, throw it in the oven, and be out the door in only a few minutes, rather than having to wait hours and hours and hours. This was rushed food. It was a symbol of our eagerness to leave Egypt. It was a symbol of being prepared to leave Egypt, even with what most of us would consider inferior fare, inferior meals, rather than stay and be slaves. Something that again comes back later on in the Torah, where some of the people are remembering the supposed meat that they ate in Egypt. Some people are remembering the cucumbers and other types of vegetables they used to eat in Egypt. So the idea that Egypt had plentiful food is definitely echoed in our ritual of the matzah, that we are willing to go from a place of plenty, Egypt, into a place of nothing, meaning the wilderness of Sinai, if it means that we can be freed and redeemed. And then, of course, the bitter herb is because of the embitterness of our lives. I've already spoken extensively in a previous class about how the maror needs to be a bitter plant, not a horseradish spicy plant. It is the bitterness that is the emotion that is most important to be savored, experienced at this time. Because oftentimes when people will recount the story of the Exodus from Egypt, many people will, thinking themselves clever, wonder, why didn't we leave earlier? Why not just have a slave rebellion? Why didn't we all just get up and leave? What were they going to do? Kill us all? And the fact is that while most of those would not have worked, as we've seen throughout history, that slave rebellions usually are not successful, the fact, and most important fact, is that the slavery embittered us to the idea of life. It didn't just hurt us. It didn't just break us physically through the labor. It actually made us feel that life itself was a bitter tragedy. And as such, we resigned ourselves to the enslavement that we had to endure. And so the option of rebellion or of flight faded from active consideration because of that bitterness. And that is something that can only be experienced through bitterness. Now, bitterness is hard to generate as an experience, which is why maror was added here, so that we would have at least some physical reminder of that bitterness, because true bitterness indeed is a physical visceral experience. It's not just a idea, and it's not just a feeling. It's something that takes root within you and physically changes you and chains you. And that is all being encapsulated here in Our Maror. And then, of course, we get the famous exposition. In every generation, a man is obligated to regard himself as though he personally had gone forth from Egypt. We just talked about what happened to our ancestors, and now we are reminding ourselves that this didn't just happen to our ancestors, it happened to me. Because it is said in the book of Exodus, and you shall tell your son on that day, it is because of that which the Lord did for me when I came forth out of Egypt. Now, when we say this, after the first few years, this is always going to be a lie. It'll be hyperbole. The vast majority of Jews who have lived throughout the last 3,000 years were never slaves in Egypt. Only that very, very first generation, most of who died before they even reached the land of Israel. So past that initial generation, we have been saying this happened to me, even though I wasn't there. Why? Because we are meant to feel as though we were personally redeemed, because we must recognize that the life we lead is only possible because of the redemption that happened at that moment. We were redeemed. I would not be sitting here in my house and talking to you and sharing the story of the Passover Exodus were I not redeemed from Egypt. I would still be trapped, whether I'd be trapped in Egypt itself, whether I'd be trapped in the patterns of life and of government and of oppression that Egypt represented, or in the trap of idolatry and misapprehension of God's presence. I would still be a slave to something that would prevent me from having the life that I currently have. And so we can say, in all honesty, I was brought out of Egypt on this day. For everything that has happened since was necessary. With that in mind, that what happened for our ancestors and what happened for us, it then makes sense, says the Mishnah, therefore it is our duty to thank, praise, laud, glorify, raise up, beautify, bless, extol, and adore him. This is standard Hebrew poetry of listing off synonyms. Sometimes it feels a little bit like a thesaurus. It is simply trying to do the A to Z that we might do in an English acronym kind of way, or acrostic, where we are showing a totality. But this is a very common poetic device in Hebrew. So what do? We have to do all of this for God, who made all these miracles for our fathers, our ancestors, and ourselves. He brought us forth from slavery into freedom, from sorrow into joy, from mourning into festivity, from darkness into great light, and from servitude into redemption. Let us say before him, Hallelujah. Hallelujah as a word simply means give praise to God, but Hallelujah can also be used as the introduction for Hallel. Hallel is the technical term for a set of psalms that is recited not only during the Seder, but is also recited on other holidays as a way of celebrating, of thanking, praising, lauding, glory, etc., all that God has done for us. And so this is reminding us that Hallel is part of our Passover Seder as well. So that is Mishnah 5 from chapter 10. Let's move on to the next page. The question comes up, how far does one recite it? Meaning Hallel, how much of Hallel do you recite? Now, this is clearly a question that is being directed at people who already understand the agenda. They know that Hallel is recited, and they know that Hallel is broken in half, meaning that we recite part of Hallel before the meal, and we recite part of Hallel after the meal. And the question then is, well, where do we draw the line? This is clearly something that is still debated at the time of the end of the Second Temple period, in the early years of the Common Era. Beit Shammai says, until as a joyous mother of children, which is the section of Psalm 113. But Beit Hillel says, until the flinty rock into a fountain of waters, which is part of Psalm 114. And he concludes with a formula of redemption. what would that formula look like? How would you add in something at the end of reciting Hallel in order to bring this pause into its conclusion? Rabbi Tarfon says, who redeemed us and redeemed our fathers, our ancestors from Egypt. But he did not conclude with a blessing, meaning he didn't use a Baruch Atah formula. He simply said, thank you to the one who redeemed us and redeemed our ancestors. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, now another layer of students and getting into the 2nd century of the Common Era, Rabbi Akiva says, so may the Lord our God and the God of our fathers bring us to other appointed times and festivals which come toward us for peace, rejoicing in the building of your city and glad in your service. And there we will eat the sacrifices and the Pesachim, Passover sacrifices, etc., until blessed are you who has redeemed Israel. So Rabbi Akiva appoints an actual blessing that is used in this conclusion of this section of the initial phrase of Hallel. Now, what's going on here? Well, obviously there is the basic choreography of what do we say and when, and there is a basic argument about what to be said and when. But what are they arguing about? Because it's not ever just one prefers or one prefers. There is always some underlying reasoning, motivation, interpretation behind these different discussions. So Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai are arguing about exactly how much of the introductory passages of Hallel are we meant to recite? How far do we go in that recitation before we actually get to the fullness of the eating of matzah, the maror, and the meal? Because obviously the bulk of Hallel is going to be reserved until after we actually have that high point of the meal. The bulk of Hallel is recited after Birkat HaMazon, after we do the blessing, after we have concluded our food. So they are arguing about this fundamental conception of, do we celebrate before, during, after we actually have redemption? And the argument is not really about one of those threes. The argument comes down on during, but with different places to balance it. And that is an incredible insight that is so often missed and so often skipped, unfortunately, in many people's personal Haggadah recitation, where people will focus on getting through all of the steps rather than recognizing that through this bracketing device of Hallel, we are actually reliving what our ancestors did in the past, which was to have the first Seder during the 10th plague. It was not before we were fully redeemed. It was not after we were fully redeemed. It was literally in the midst of our redemption that was coming through that final moment, that final doorway being opened, even as ours was marked with the Passover blood. So this is for our own self in our modern time and throughout all of our generations, a reminder that we celebrate while in the midst of redemption. We don't wait to see how it turns out. We are willing to have joy during something, and we also don't maybe don't get too preemptive, but wait for the glimmers to begin and then start the celebration, carry it through, and conclude after the redemption is complete. Which is why, of course, Rabbi Akiva gives us a blessing that points towards more redemption that is coming, more celebrations that are coming, hope for what comes next as well. And of course, the ever-present grammatical forms from both Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva are talking not only about the past, but are talking about the present as well, that we are still being redeemed by God. It is not just our ancestors, it wasn't just a one-shot event in the past, that this is still happening for us. And of course, that goes back to the idea that we saw in paragraph 5 of reliving or feeling like we are being redeemed during Passover directly. Now, we then move on into paragraph 7 with Birkat HaMazon, which should indicate to you that a lot of other stuff happens between 6 and 7. We've got to eat matzah, we've got to eat maror, What about the Hillel sandwich? What about all of those things? Well, those don't appear on the page in the Mishnah. They begin to crop up in different forms in the Talmud and then later rabbinic writings. But obviously we know we did eat matzah because that had been discussed earlier. Obviously we know we do eat maror because that has been discussed earlier. But the formal presentation of that doesn't get stated explicitly here in the Mishnah. Instead, we know that we will have those elements. We will have our main meal at which the Passover sacrifice would be eaten. And then we, of course, have to do Birkat Hamazon. And as we see here in paragraph number 7, they poured him, meaning whoever is leading the Seder, a third cup, blesses over his meal. Now, what are we talking about here? Well, Birkat Hamazon classically is done with a cup of wine. This is not something that is done every place at all times, but there is a long-standing practice of actually pouring a new glass of wine for whomever is reciting Birkat Hamazon. And then that person will hold that cup, will say Birkat Hamazon, and then do Borei Pri Hagafen, because it's a new meal, for the wine, and then do a new blessing just over the wine itself, as an after blessing for having drunk that. This is in order that Birkat Hamazon be done in a joyous way. After all, we might feel that, well, we just ate. What am I looking forward to next? It's sad, but very common that many times we feel less gratitude unless we are anticipating what comes next. And so having this cup of wine provides us with a forward-looking motivation for that recitation of Birkat Hamazon. And that is the third cup officially. But that cup would have been done in most meals where Birkat Hamazon was being recited. And then the fourth cup, well, the fourth cup is poured or mixed, to use the technical phrasing. And then we continue with the Hallel. We resume our recitation of Hallel. And then we recite Hallel while we have that cup. And then we would say the blessing over the fourth cup as the conclusion of, at the conclusion of that recitation. And then we get a very important note. Between these cups, if he wants, he may drink, meaning between the most of the cups of the evening, but between the third and fourth, he may not drink. So if you have done your original Kiddush at the beginning of the service, boom, no problem, you're allowed to drink. When you've done the other blessing for the cup of wine that was recited during the telling of the story of the Haggadah, boom, no problem if you want to keep pouring and keep going. And between that one and Birkat Hamazon, meaning the period during dinner, of course, no problem, pour and go. Once you've done Birkat Hamazon, however, we don't continue to drink as though we were just at a drinking party, which will be very relevant when we get to paragraph 8. So there is a hard stop there. Now, before we get to paragraph 8, which talks about the conclusion of the Seder and a few other details, I'd like to point out things that are missing. You may notice that we don't have a formal discussion of the rabbis of Bnei Barak. We don't have a formal discussion of the 4 children, although certainly it mentioned in passing the types of people. We don't have a formal idea of the youngest saying Manish Tana, even though we did get questions that would be used as prompts for very young children. We don't get Dayenu. We don't get Adirhu. We don't get many of the other elements that are familiar to us from our own Seders in the 21st century. And that's because those elements have been added over the decades, over the millennia. We have added new poems, we have added new texts, we have added new reflections, because over the ages, different rabbis and different communities at different times and different places have either created or grabbed hold of texts that were already existing but not part of the Haggadah and woven them into this process because they found them relevant, because they found them meaningful, because they actually made them feel something during their Seder that they had not felt in its absence. Unfortunately, over time, many people now take those simply as being things to go through and tick off the box. And that deadens them, as we talked about last week, last session, and makes them have very little impact on what we are actually doing, other than, yay, I like the melody here, or wow, that was really long. We don't get the full flavor of it. On the other hand, apart from bloating the Haggadah for many people, which again is not a problem if you're willing to embrace what is there, it does open up the idea that I hope more people will embrace, that your own Seder should be different every year. You should be looking for new poems, new songs, new melodies, new reflections, new questions, new ideas that you can add. And the great ones that really work for you and your family and friends will get added in. You'll end up with a folder of different supplements that are part of your family's Seder. And in time, you will also find that some of them become a little mechanical. Well, that might be a good reason to either retire it or to focus on rekindling the original intention inside each of them. But that's something that is a constant personal and shared experience for each family and each community. And our Haggadah is only so rich as it is because communities have done that over the last thousands of years in order to make sure the Seder was always a living and vital force. There are billions of Seders out there. Many Haggadot have already been printed. Many supplemental materials are there. So please don't stop looking for ways to make your Seder a little different. Just reading all the words is not fulfilling the duty, nor is it having the impact that it needs to have on you. We'll look at that in more detail in just a minute, but we want to look finally at paragraph 8, Mishnah 8, from the end of chapter 10 of Pesachim. One may not conclude the Pesach meal with an afikomen. All right, now I'm sure that all of you are saying, wait a minute, I thought we had to have the afikomen. Well, there's the afikomen and then there's the afikomen. There is the afikomen that we know, which is the eating of that piece of matzah that was broken from the middle slice and set aside, perhaps hidden from the children, or maybe the children kidnapped it and ransomed it back. Different customs in different communities. But that final piece of matzah is the last thing that we eat. That is our current custom and practice. However, the word afikomen itself is not referring to it at this stage. At this stage, it is referring to the generic practice of the Greco-Roman world of having a progressive party. And by progressive, I don't mean political. By progressive, I mean going from house to house and continuing the drinking and eating until you usually will pass out and then, wake up in the morning with a horrible hangover. The idea here is that that is not what should happen here. The rabbis were acutely aware that their Seder, the way that it was being further refined and choreographed in their day, bore a striking resemblance to many of the symposia, the parties of drink and conversation and philosophical discussion that were common in the Greco-Roman world of their day. And they didn't mind that there was that corollary, that they could, sit around the tables and have these amazing discussions and songs about Pesach, and it looked almost identical to the Greco-Roman era, laying about on their same types of couches and eating from the same sort of tables. But they were extremely worried that people would take it to the unfortunate conclusion of, well, just like in the Greco-Roman world, when we finish this meal, we should keep going on to our next neighbor's house or down the street and continue to drink and continue to party and continue to eat all the way through. The rabbis were perfectly fine staying up all night, learning and studying and reflecting and feeling the joy of Passover, but they were not happy about ushering in a drinking festival where people would just get slammed over and over again and turn it into an act of debauchery and inebriation. And so when they say there is no afikomen, what they mean is do not do like the Greco-Romans, do not go around and do more drinking and feasting after the actual official Seder is over. We're done, and that's it. And then you go to bed with that feeling of joy, of spiritual uplift, of promise of redemption, and a full stomach, and perhaps a little bit of a convivial glow from your 4 cups of wine. But that's it. That there is an upper limit, if you will, to our form of celebration. Now, they still were not, they were never naive, and they understood that sometimes people would, well, still get a little carried away. And so we have a question that comes up. If some of them fell asleep, why might they fall asleep? Well, one, it goes long. Although we are meant to have the Passover sacrifice before midnight, so it's not that long that we're talking about. But we will have had at least a couple of cups of wine, and as we saw already, you could continue to drink in between. That some people may get a little bit more drunk than they really ought to be. This does happen, but it does raise a very important question. If some of them fell asleep, some of the members of the Seder, then they may eat, meaning they can still eat the Pesach when they wake up, meaning the people who happen to nap, when they wake up and it's time for the main meal, which involves the Passover sacrifice, they are still allowed to eat it because as part of the group, the community, the collective celebratory party, they can sort of piggyback on the alertness of their co-celebrants, the other people who are celebrating, in order to still partake of this. That there has not been a complete rupture in the process of the celebration because others have been maintaining it. It is a wonderful reminder of the ability for a group to achieve something that an individual could not. However, if all of them fell asleep, they may not eat, meaning that if everybody just fell asleep and then someone wakes up and goes, oh, wait, guys, wait, we haven't even had dinner yet, tough. They can eat regular food, but not the Passover sacrifice. The Passover sacrifice is has as its component the Seder itself. And if you have completely ruptured the Seder, then you can't actually partake in the Passover sacrifice. So make sure you have a designated person that is awake. Now, Rabbi Yosei offers a different way to interpret this. He says if they napped, they can eat, but if they fell asleep, they may not eat. He here is arguing that people may doze off and on during the Seder. That's sort of understandable, but if you actually are full on face down or head back, snoring asleep, then no, you've lost your place in line. You're not able to eat from the Passover offering itself. So, trying to remind us in this discussion of sleep, which hopefully is not a big problem for many people these days, but still we can take from this last paragraph that the Seder is something that is meant to be experienced. It is not meant to be something merely that you run up the clock on. The Seder is something that is meant to move us. And if you're having trouble with that, well, then go back, take it to its skeleton, and rebuild it in a way that will work for you. All of the elements are there. It's just a matter of finding a way to reconnect to them and allow them to actually provide a meaningful moving experience. If you are sleepwalking through your Seder, then you're doing something wrong. Even if you did everything right, if you're sleepwalking through it, you did something wrong. All right, and we're going to use that as a springboard, skipping the text we did last time, to finish up with a text that's taken from Rabbi Samuel Raphael Hirsch, one of the great luminaries of the Jewish world in the 19th century, from his magnum opus of Horeb, his large volume trying to extol the virtues of Judaism and living Jewishly. And this comes right up from the opening. And you'll find in it a parallel in many ways to the ideas of John Stuart Mill that we began this section of analyzing the Seder with. but which we talked about last week, last session, right? So let's take a look and see what Rabbi Samuel Raphael Hirsch had to say. Again, we're talking in the middle of the 1800s. Life as lived should be the flower of knowledge. But in order that life may blossom out of knowledge, knowledge alone is not enough. The knowledge with which you have enriched your mind must be applied to yourself. You must recognize what you know as appertaining to you. You must transfer it from the mind to the heart, which decides your course of action. It must penetrate you through and through. It must become part of yourself. Then only will it become the basis of your activity. It will become your life. So he's going to continue to explain this, but let me make sure that you're not completely lost with the translation of this 19th century text. So in Horeb in particular, but throughout much of his writings, Rabbi Hirsch was worried that people were performing Judaism by rote, that they would fill their minds with all sorts of facts and knowledge, but they wouldn't actually feel what they had learned. That wouldn't actually impact them deeply enough to then impact their behavior. Yes, a person could go through the motions, but it wouldn't actually be a true flowering of what they had learned. It would just be a recitation, whether it be in word or physical form. And he wants to make sure that what we learn, he is very much focused on, in this first paragraph, how we learn through books and through lectures and through teachers, that doesn't just come into our mind, but it penetrates to our heart, which we've described before in Jewish thought is the seat of action. And in the heart, it actually influences how we live. He will get into a very particular focus here and some more ideas. So also with the highest of all concepts, God. Your idea of God may be something more than the mere result of a chain of reasoning pursued in total abstraction from the outside world. So, first version of coming to the concept of God could be you're sitting in a quiet room and you're simply meditating upon reality, and you are aware of the idea that there should be an idea of God. Right? The first mover, the prime mover, the creator of all, the ultimate singular source of all. It's a very rational, a reasoned sort of abstraction of God. That's one version of coming to God, in addition to the idea of just being taught about God. You could come to God this way in your mind. Or you may have beheld God directly in nature or perceived him in history. So you have witnessed a great storm, or you have seen a great natural vista, or you have reflected on the flow of history, and in that process you have come to feel something of God's existence, something of God's presence. Or Holy Writ may have spoken to you as it did to generations before you in its God-revealing narratives, that you might have come across a passage in Tanakh, somewhere in the Torah or the rest of the Bible, that as you read it, it stirred you to feel this idea of God, that God was real, that this is what God means when I say God. But you may have grasped all of this only with your mind and stored it in your memory. This is not enough. So it's very easy, and it has become easier since even the 19th century, to take experiences and to simply store them as things that happen. We take a picture, we put it in the album, and now we're done. But that experience that the picture represents doesn't actually penetrate into us. Yes, it's something we did. Yes, we could even talk about it. We might even be able to be eloquent about our experience. Oh, I never felt so close to God as the birth of my child, et cetera, et cetera. But it's still just stored. It's there as part of our catalog of events, a catalog of ideas, and that is not enough. He continues, so long as you do not receive God into your heart as your God and embrace him with your whole being as your God, so long as this concept is a mere denizen of your brain, so long will this sovereign idea be without influence on your actual life. So what he's saying is that it's perfectly possible for somebody to be aware of God as an existence, to have experienced God, whether it be through philosophy, literature, or nature, and even to be able to say, I believe God exists, but to do so in a way that isolates the concept of God from your actual life, that it's simply something that you say. It's simply something that you will attest to if asked, but it doesn't impact what you do. And this is unfortunately all too common. It is very common in the modern world where we divide up so much of our life into things that are shared through the curation of social media, where we're often looking to just get the credit for having done it rather than to actually take into ourselves the meaning of what it was that occurred. But even in the 19th century, Hirsch was already seeing this as a significant problem. And indeed, it's been a significant problem for all of history, because it's very easy for ideas to be neatly stored and sealed away so that they don't actually change how we live. They don't demand anything of us. They don't make us change. They don't do anything that makes us behave differently. Instead, you may again recognize the world as the temple of God's omnipotence, without, however, feeling that every spot on which you tread is in this temple is hallowed to God. So you can say, how beautiful is God's creation, but do you actually treat each place like part of God's holy creation? When you're driving down the I-4, are you reflecting on this as part of God's creation? Are you recognizing this as part of the sacred world that God has built? Or are you cursing your luck for having to be stuck there? You may recognize in the multitude of created beings a great concourse of the servants of God. Look at what God has made, without, however, regarding and feeling yourself as also a creature and servant of God. So we look at all of the people of the world and say, wow, look at how this reflects God's glory and beauty, that God has populated the world with such as this. And you stop to reflect that also counts for you, both for the idea that just as you want others to behave in a godly manner, you so too must behave in a godly manner, but also just as you are in awe and wonder of other people's existence, and that God would create such a beautiful and varied tapestry of humanity, recognize that you are also a part of that you are one of those beautiful threads. And as such, there is praise for God in yourself as well. And you may have recognized the lofty vocation of Israel as God's instrument in history for the education of the human race, without feeling yourself to be in every fiber a son or daughter of Israel. I have to say this last one is the one that I have been most frustrated with in my 20 years as a rabbi, of the many people I meet who are fully willing to talk about how amazing the people of Israel are, the Jews of the world and Jews throughout history, all that we have accomplished and all that God has blessed us with. It is so amazing how we gave this idea to humanity and we overcame this problem in the world, and we gave insight, or we worked on this particular challenge and helped solve or at least move a problem closer to solution for humanity. Very, very proud of being part of the people of Israel, but don't actually stop and feel themselves as being a Ben or Bat Yisrael, an actual member of the people doing this, that there is a stolen valor where people will share in the glory of what Jews have done over millennia without actually feeling personally responsible for doing that themselves. Isn't it amazing how the Jews have survived for the last 2,000 years with all of the things thrown against us? But many of the people I meet in casual settings will very often not be willing to lift a finger to do anything to help the Jews survive till next year, let alone for the next 1,000 years. So this is something that people will recognize, will see, will know, will be aware of, but it will not impact their actual behavior. And Hirsch will finish by saying, so long as this is so, your knowledge is barren. Great that you know these things. Great that you've learned these things. Great that you've experienced these things. But it's actually lifeless. The flower of actual life does not spring from it. If all you've done is accumulate a set of experiences like photos in an album, whether they be from literature, from history, from nature, from any other rational or mystical experience, if it doesn't change how you live, then doesn't actually matter. It is dead soil. It is lifeless photos in an album that mean nothing beyond the fact that they occurred, because it means nothing for the people that look at them. And we know it means nothing because they don't live their life differently because of the events that are contained within that album. If you can walk through the photo album of all of your experiences of Judaism, of all of your ideas that you have learned, of all of the great moments in your life when you recognized God and godliness, and it still lets you treat other people like dirt. It still lets you hide away from your responsibilities as a Jew. It still lets you behave in a way that is antithetical to God's plan for this world. Then all of that experience, all of those incredible moments, all of that history, all of that literature is doing nothing. It's just a collection like fake books on a shelf behind somebody and when doing a picture to try to give the illusion of intelligence or wisdom. It isn't, because it doesn't penetrate into action. And the Seder has to penetrate to action to be real. The Seder is not merely a performative meal where we retell a story and then turn around and violate everything that the Seder is trying to tell us to do. If we want to speak about the redemption from Egypt in order that we can be the servants of God, then by God, be a servant of God the next day. Don't turn around and ignore everything else that Judaism has told you. If you want to celebrate the themes of freedom and of liberty and of the breaking of chains of slavery, then by God, go out there in the world and work on those issues. There are more people enslaved now than there have been at any other point in human history. Free them. If you are friends with somebody that is in trouble, well, if yesterday you said, here is the bread of affliction, let all who are hungry come, and then the next day somebody says they need help to you, and you say, sorry, can't. Why were you holding up matzah as the bread of affliction and opening the door to who? Was it all just an act? Does it mean nothing? The Seder is there to make us experience these things in order that we will live these things. It is meant to translate what can be extremely abstract, esoteric, and difficult concepts into not only emotions and experiences for ourselves, but into action in our lives. It is meant to control how we live so that this world actually continues to move in the direction of redemption. And that is what we look for in our Seder. And it's hard because as humans, we have this tendency of just photo albuming everything, of having experiences and then allowing the experience to be encapsulated in some corner of the mind, but sealed off from the actual levers of power, which would control our behavior or change us into doing better things. And that is not a Jewish problem, that is a human problem. And which is why I brought John Stuart Mill in the last session in order to show you the same problem occurs in multiple cultures everywhere around the world. But, well, I'm a rabbi, so I'm going to focus on the Jewish element. Don't only make your Seder new this year. Don't only find something different. But in the process of making it new, even if it's retelling the Seder as in the Haggadah, but with new ideas, in the process of making it new, also change yourself. Make a difference in how you're going to behave on the next day. And if I can be so bold, over the next 49 days, as we count the Omer leading up towards the holiday of Shavuot, where we receive the Torah, each day, just look for something in Judaism, an experience you've had or an experience that you're having as you continue to learn and explore Judaism in that intermediate time that would have a real world difference. Whether it's just something as simple as being a little bit more polite to someone else, as maybe a slight difference of how you would approach somebody that was looking for help. Maybe it's a small change in your own personal practice in order to give you another opportunity to reinforce these ideas on a more regular basis through brachot, through blessings, or through tefillah, through prayer. Find something that you can do differently. The Seder is not supposed to be just a meal that is bracketed away just for that night. It is meant to be an experience from which we emerge transformed and which changes our life. With that, I will wish everyone a Chag Sameach, have a wonderful, joyous holiday. That change absolutely needs to include happiness. And maybe all be blessed with a Passover that leads to redemption for us and for all the world. And may we be willing and eager to be participants in that project. Take care, everyone, and be well.